On today's World Insight, China launches a carbon trading scheme while the U.S. rejoins the Paris Accord. Is a common front on climate change forming between China and the U.S.? And at a leadership panel on climate action at the Davos Agenda, we find out how governments and businesses in Europe and Asia step up to combat climate change. Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello, I'm Tian Wei, and welcome to World Insight Live on CGTN. China and the United States are the world's two largest carbon emitters. Their actions will, to a large degree, determine if the world can avoid a climate change catastrophe. New measures are going into force in both countries. On February the 1st, China officially launches a national carbon emissions trading scheme. U.S. President Joe Biden has signed a slew of climate executive orders. Will these developments bring real change to the world's climate efforts, which have been grossly insufficient up to now, particularly over the past 4 years? So what's the process of China-U.S. climate cooperation with the new man in the White House? Before we ask our panelists, let's take a look at this.
Wildfires, melting ice, record-breaking hurricanes. These climate events in 2020 could just be a prelude of what's to come next. The Earth has warmed by 1.25 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, getting close to the 1.5 degree threshold countries had set to avoid in the Paris Agreement. Even as the pandemic grinded many human activities to a halt, the 6% drop in global emissions in 2020 is not enough to hit the Paris goals. Is there still a chance? That will largely depend on what the world's two largest carbon emitters, China and the U.S., do. Chinese President Xi Jinping recently reiterated the country's plan to peak CO2 emissions by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality before 2060.
实现这个目标，中国需要付出极其艰巨的努力。
Meeting these targets will require tremendous hard work from China. Yet we believe that when the interests of the entire humanity are at stake, China must step forward, take action, and get the job done. Coal still accounts for most of China's energy consumption, but the proportion of non-fossil fuel energy has been steadily rising. On February 1st, the National Carbon Emissions Trading Scheme officially launched. It follows a number of pilot programs which spanned multiple industries and cities over the past 8 years. The new U.S. president is signing ambitious executive actions on climate. These include pausing new oil and gas leases on federal land and cutting fossil fuel subsidies.
This executive order I'm signing today also makes it official that climate change will be at the center of our national security and foreign policy.
Joe Biden, Secretary of State and Special Envoy, have both said that the U.S. will work together with China on climate, an area of mutual interest for both countries. The world will be counting on that prospect. Last week, the Finnish town of Salla, which sits inside the Arctic Circle, announced that it will bid to host the 2032 Summer Olympics. It is a satirical campaign, but the message is serious.
Hey, you really want the games here?
For more discussion on climate change and carbon emissions, particularly efforts coming from China and the United States, we are joined in Boston by Michael Milling, Deputy Director of the Center for Energy and Environmental Policy Research at MIT. In Beijing, Professor Qi Ye from the Public Policy Center at Tsinghua University, and also Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Today is a good day, I guess, for China, particularly when it comes to climate change issues. President Xi has already earlier pledged about the 2060 carbon neutrality from China. Professor Qi, carbon trading scheme for China, what does it mean? How fast a step is this toward 2060?
It is a major step, and by signing into this China's carbon trading scheme, and nearly 40%, well, just about 40% of all emissions will be under this the carbon market here in China, even though it's just one sector, the power sector. And then for the worldwide, this will become the largest carbon market in the world, bigger than the EU ETS so far has been running for just about 15 years. And this will be a major step for China to achieve its carbon peak before 2030, and it's a major step towards the 2060 carbon neutrality. So we'll see this the first time with a nationwide system of carbon market is applied, and we have a carbon pricing system now.
How is carbon trading being done in the United States so far, Mr. Milling?
Well, the question is, where is it being done in the U.S.? So unfortunately, attempts during the presidency of Barack Obama to launch a federal emissions trading system, such as you have done in China today, failed due to a lacking political majority in the Senate at the time. And instead, what we've seen is the proliferation of smaller schemes. California has had an emissions trading system for almost a decade. And in the Northeast, a few states, 11 states have been trading carbon since 2009. But it's not a national carbon trading system like what you're seeing in China now.
On the other hand, though, Mr. Milling, we do see some encouraging signs coming from the executive order signed by President Biden after he's coming into the office, suggesting about the U.S. future directions. How will these executive orders lead the U.S. To a certain degree turn the earlier direction? He suggests a word bold, but how bold are they in terms of real actions?
That's a good question. You mentioned their executive orders. That means that they're actions by the administration, not by Congress, not by the legislature. And that means they could be overturned by a future administration. But with that said, I think it's useful to remember that the president has ample powers in foreign policy under the U.S. Constitution. So when he declares, and he has, of course, on the first day of taking office, 2 weeks ago, that he would rejoin the Paris Agreement, that will happen with effect on February 19th, the 30-day sort of window that the Paris Agreement requires. And there's a number of other foreign policy actions that the president has pledged to take in the first 100 days and beyond, but also some domestic actions, in particular, rolling back what the previous president, Donald Trump, had sort of undone in terms of climate and environmental policy.
Right. Professor Qi, you've been working both in the U.S. and in China on a frequent basis earlier, of course, before the COVID. So tell me more about your assessment of where the U.S. is in terms of its quote-unquote bold efforts so far.
Well, I think the U.S. is a really a major step to see that President Biden has signing the executive order, and this is in a way it's a restart of the Paris process for the United States. And the United States, under the Paris Agreement, pledged to reduce the greenhouse gas emission by 26 to 28% by 2025. You know, the good news is by the end of last year, 2020, largely due to the pandemic, there was a 12% of cut in carbon emission in 1 year alone. That means by the end of 2020, now the United States has achieved its target set for the year 2025. Of course, we know there will be a rebound for the next 5 years. If you know, with the economic recovery, then I think there is still a big challenge.
Right.
But that's also a very good indication that the United States actually can achieve that target by extra effort. So I think as a bold ambition, and this gives us a very good hint for the new administration to rethink and reset the target for even greater ambition for under the Paris Agreement.
I see. However, Mr. Milling, we understand for future actions, particular actions at national level, there's going to be a lot of congressional support that's needed, given the still divided politically United States. Some say it's not the United States, it's divided states of America. Well, that's a joke, but still, how much can the Biden administration be able to achieve during the first 100 days?
Well, that's the question I think that many in Washington, D.C., in the Beltway are asking as well, and starting to feel out what will Democrats garner support for within their own caucus. So with the Democrats in the House and with the Democrats in the Senate, where the majority in each chamber is very slim. And can they maybe even win some support from moderate Republicans on certain issues? And I think the focus right now is really starting to zero in on investment. So green investments that somehow contribute to infrastructure, to contribute to pandemic recovery. That seems to be a topic that gets some bilateral support and could advance through legislation. There's also some thinking about using the budget reconciliation process to get through any kinds of measures that relate to fiscal policy, like support for renewables, etc. But a lot of the stuff will still probably happen purely through executive rulemaking, and that's of course more vulnerable and has some, first of all, it's not as durable if there's a change in administration in 4 years, and of course it also doesn't quite have the same scope.
Right. Yeah. A lot of people are having that question mark in mind, what's going to happen in 4 years, because President Biden will not be able to control what's after his current 4 years. Anyway, we are also honored to be joined on the phone by Brian Murray, who is director of the Duke University's Energy Initiative. Mr. Murray, good to see you, but I want to listen to this quote before I ask you a question. Last week, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the U.S. climate envoy John Kerry both expressed the willingness to cooperate with China on climate change. John Kerry, also the former U.S. Secretary of State, said that no issues between the two nations, meaning China and U.S., would be traded for climate-related cooperation. In response, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that China and the United States share broad common interests and cooperation space in coping with climate change. End of quote. It seems that both sides are putting climate change on top of the agenda, at least for the world, and maybe being partners in that regard, working together. How big is that hope? How big a window opportunity do we have so far? Mr. Murray.
Thank you for having me on. I think
it's a
very big opportunity. The United States and China are the two world's largest emitters and the two world's largest economies. So it's impossible to imagine that the climate change problem can be solved without deep collaboration between these two countries. There has been a history of collaboration between the U.S. and China on this. That history took a little bit of a pause over the last years under the previous administration, but I think it's a good opportunity right now to resume that collaboration.
What kind of opportunities specifically are we thinking? Is it about carbon trading? Is it about working on a third-party topic regarding climate change? What is the opportunity that you're thinking about, Ms. Murray?
Well, in regards to carbon trading, I don't think there are immediate opportunities, say, for the United States and China to be trading with each other on carbon, because the United States, as was mentioned earlier by Dr. Mailing, does not have a comprehensive trading program or a comprehensive carbon price at the national level. That would take legislation and that would take time in the United States. However, as was also discussed, the United States does have experience with carbon markets at the subnational level, and there can be lessons learned. But there have been, in the academic community, there has been, and with governments, there has been a lot of collaboration between the U.S. and China on carbon markets and carbon market design, and I think that will continue regardless of whether the U.S. operates at the national level with carbon trading. However, I think there's an...
Go ahead, sir.
If I could just say, I think there's an opportunity for further collaboration on discovery of new technologies and for ensuring that those technologies get adopted widely in the United States, in China, and in other countries.
Dr. Merling, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think Professor Murray put it very well, and I think that we saw ahead of the Paris Agreement adoption in 2015 that it was bilateral cooperation, a meeting of the heads of state of the U.S. and China that sort of smoothed certain obstacles on the way to successfully passing the Paris Agreement. And I think this kind of bilateral cooperation can move and overcome obstacles, for instance, on the way to COP26 later this year, where a lot of unresolved issues have been on pause for over a year of no effective negotiations. So the stakes are very high to getting this ambition COP26 in Glasgow in November.
Certainly the stakes are extremely high. Professor Qi, though there was already very intense cooperation between China and European countries in the issue of climate change, while the U.S. was absent from the international stage, as Mr. John Kerry frankly noted also during his talk at the just concluded Davos Agenda about the U.S. absence. But having said that, though, Ms. Professor Qi, what role is China really thinking that the U.S. could play in terms of the global cooperation on climate change? When U.S. was absent, China seems to do quite well, trying to bring in its own initiative and goals and trying to stick to those goals and implement.
I think that both countries right now are willing to work together. And this reminds us that just about 12 years ago, at the beginning of the Obama administration, and that administration also set this target to put climate change as a center component, center part for U.S. and China cooperation. And we remember the first trip when Hillary Clinton was visiting China in February 2009, and throughout that entire year, there were numerous very high-level visits from the United States to China. And at the end of that year, between the President Obama and President Hu Jintao, they signed 5 agreements on clean energy cooperation. However, the cooperation has not been going really well. And we all realize the potential for technological innovation cooperation. We also realize huge opportunities for investment, mutual investment in each other. But now it seems to get even harder than just a couple of years ago now, because with the skepticism, the doubts on both sides maybe, and I think we realize the chance, and but we realize the potential. But there are real challenges right now. I would like to see some major breakthrough in technological innovation and also in mutual investment.
A lot of you talk about the technological innovation and mutual investment. Exactly which area are you talking about? What kinds of technologies specifically are on the desired list? Professor Qi, be specific.
Well, the major area is on clean energy. We know for China, in order to achieve the 2060 carbon neutrality, and the investment in that will be $20 trillion. We're talking about in 40 years. And the President Biden just made his announcement about $2 trillion program for the United States. So these are opportunities. These are the requirement for investment, and these are investment for the energy system transformation. And the U.S. and China and actually can work together in this major area. Just recently, last week, President Biden announced, he welcomes the investment from China. I think that's a very good sign. And, finally, after 4 years, we see a very positive development signs and for mutual investment and collaboration, possibly on collaboration on technology.
We know that President Biden is going to speak quite soon, in fact, on the new administration's foreign policy approach. Indeed, we'll see what's going to come after that speech. And I know that the Chinese side will also have a senior official on Tuesday morning, which is the evening, Monday Monday evening, U.S. time, to also speak on the Chinese side about the China-U.S. relations, which is likely to be a very interesting interaction. We're going to watch very closely. But having said that, though, Dr. Milling, tell me more about whether Professor Qi said, illustrated as key areas that you are reflecting upon also. Tell me more about what's your thoughts.
Well, I think that what both Professor Qi and Professor Murray brought into the discussion here in the panel, the role of technology is absolutely critical. If I look at sort of the success in decarbonizing around the world, not just in specific countries, but around the world, it has been closely linked to the price decline in clean energy and the diffusion of those energy technologies, renewables such as wind, solar, et cetera, around the world. But we have a number of additional technologies that we have to spur down the same innovation and cost decline curve. Things like energy storage, for instance, infrastructure, of course, also carbon removal technologies, et cetera. And in all of those, we need to do the same thing, invest heavily and cooperate and lower barriers for diffusion, for transfer, for trade of these technologies in order to achieve the same global diffusion so that this becomes an affordable and viable alternative in China, but also in the developing world, in sub-Saharan Africa, and so on. And I think China and the US, as the two largest players on this, of course, have a lot of potential to do that. I do want to maybe bring one word of caution in as well. If you recall, in the Biden plan on climate that was issued last year during the campaign, there were also a few issues where the US was announcing it would play it would cast a critical eye on China's activities, for instance, in the Belt and Road process, investment in fossil fuel generation, for instance, in Asia and in Africa. And I think that could be the one area where I see sort of potential for some disagreement, but I hope the positive, the collaborative spirit prevails.
Very interesting analysis. Go to Mr. Murray. I hope you are still with us. Mr. Murray, tell me more. How do you think both sides, people who are in the climate change initiative area will be helping both sides to prevent geopolitics, play a leading role in this global initiative on climate change, especially between the cooperation China-US? Mr. Murray.
Sure. Hopefully you can hear me.
I can hear you very well, sir.
I think,
Thank you.
Great. I do want to back up what Dr. Mailing said, too, about what the key technologies are, because that's also an answer to the question here, too. So in addition to energy storage, which will be necessary to integrate the intermittent renewable technologies like wind and solar, there are potentially alternative generation sources like small modular reactors, nuclear reactors, as carbon-free, which is under close investigation by both the public sector and the private sector in the United States. And there's been a tremendous amount of investment in hydrogen as an energy source in both the industrial and the transportation sectors. The electric power sector is kind of well on its way, or is following a good trajectory, I think, in both countries in terms of decarbonization. But in some senses, those are the easiest parts of our economy to decarbonize. So there's going to need to be continued investments by both countries individually and I think collaboratively. Another thing to keep in mind is that both markets are huge. And so if the demand is there for clean energy in the U.S. and China, as it has been in Europe and other places, then it's really hard to imagine that the industry won't adjust to the demand that's there and continue to bring these costs down. There's been a 90% reduction in generation costs for renewables throughout the world as a result of this demand increase, and I think that will continue. Now, how can the collaboration take form? Again, that's another good use of the UN process, the Conference of Parties, to develop technology transfer protocols between the United States and China, but also between the U.S., China, and other countries throughout the world that are middle-income developing countries that are building more of their energy infrastructure in the future. And the choices that they make right now are going to be very important.
Right. Before we go, I do want to invite brief sentences or two from every one of you. We have wasted so much time. over the past 4 years to begin with, and the earlier times, and now people really realize the significance of climate change. So now, Professor Qi, China particularly, what's going to be the role for China?
Well, China in the last 4 years has been trying to play a leading role in this global climate governance.
Yeah.
And by setting the target of 2060 carbon neutrality, I think China is determined to keep that role and work with other partners, United States included,
Okay.
and to achieve a early peak and also early carbon neutrality.
All right.
And by the mid-century.
All right. Mr. Murray, brief comments. U.S. role.
I think the executive.
The U.S. role, please.
Yes, the U.S. role. The Biden administration can get the ball rolling with executive actions, but they can't push the ball all the way up the mountain. That's going to take legislation, and it's going to take aggressive action over the next decade.
I see. And Mr. Melling, please.
Well, I think, as I mentioned initially, foreign policy is one area where the U.S. president has almost unrestricted power. And I think that even if the domestic policy, climate policy, is not moving as fast as we would like, or some things stall, I think that the influence that the U.S. has diplomatically on the diplomatic arena will be very salutary, very useful for advancing climate cooperation around the world.
Michael Milling, Brian Murray, Qi Ye, thank you so much, gentlemen, for contributing your thoughts and certainly your insights. All the best and be safe wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're watching World Insight with me, Tianwei. Coming up in the program, at the Davos Agenda, I hosted a panel on climate action. How are governments and businesses in Europe and Asia stepping up to combat climate change? Right after this. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. 5 years since the Paris Climate Agreement, our planet is warming faster than ever. Heat waves and melting ice caps, harbingers of the Earth in crisis. Pandemics such as that of COVID-19 could become more common. Despite the gloom, there is hope. Governments around the world are set to lay out climate targets, even with the world's largest economy previously absent from the climate initiative. What has sparked an awakening for climate action? From governments to businesses, what are the plans and strategies that have been put in place? At the virtual Davos Agenda, just to wrap up recently, I hosted the leadership panel with global leaders from Europe and Asia to discuss how governments, businesses, and institutions could accelerate their efforts to meet the Paris Agreement goals and pull back from the irreversible tipping point. Here are the excerpts from the panel. Take a look. Mobilizing action on climate change is a common task for all of us. In order to do it well, I'm so honored to be joined by a very strong panel. They are coming from different parts of Asia and Europe, and they're going to provide us with great insights. So my honor to introduce the panelists. Teresa Ribera, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister for Ecological Transition of Spain. Christian Momentale, who is the Group CEO of Swiss Re, now based in Switzerland. Yuriko Koike, who is the Governor of Tokyo from Japan. Last but certainly not least, we have Hakcho Shin, who is the CEO of LG Chem from the Republic of Korea. Good to see you. You know, the principle that will lead us there. So tell us some more concrete issues as to what you're working on right now. What are some of the challenges? How are you overcoming these challenges?
Tokyo's population, just for your information, we have 14 million.
Sure.
Not big enough. Anyway, as a leading eco-friendly city and an international financial center, Tokyo is implementing various measures to find solutions to environmental and financial challenges. First, as one initiative we are taking to accelerate actions for a 50% reduction of CO2 emissions, we recently announced the banning of all sales of new gas-fueled cars in Tokyo by 2030. And Tokyo is a member of the C40. That is a group of major cities, including New York, London, Paris, and those major cities in the world dedicated to tackling climate change, of which I serve as a vice chair. And we will work with the other C40 member cities, as well as with the businesses, NGOs, and other organizations to call for climate action, a global movement against climate change. Now, regarding sustainable buildings, we have so many tall and big buildings in Tokyo, and which boast a high environmental performance based on our years of experience and expertise in this field. We will demonstrate leadership in their promotion, and this will be facilitated by ESG finance. And we are advancing initiatives that combine the environment and finance as measures to promote ESG investing. And these include, these include issuing Tokyo green bonds. Tokyo was the first local government in Japan to issue such bonds, and creating a Tokyo ESG fund for investment in renewable energy. And as I just mentioned, we plan to make Tokyo a leading city in green finance. To do so, we will build a system to attract capital for ESG investing from within and outside Japan, and for the creation of what we tentatively call the Tokyo Green Finance Market. This is what we are tackling and challenging.
Thank you, Governor Koike. I really love the atmosphere right here in this panel, because we see a very voluntary, friendly competition is going on about the counter plans and also actions to be implemented. Now let's go to another Asian colleague coming from South Korea, CEO of LG Chem, Mr. Shin. What about your engagement of stakeholders? Every country has their own unique cultural and also business background. How are you doing that with your company in South Korea? Tell me more about it.
Right. Obviously, collaboration is the key in making this work. Public sector, industry, and society at large, and industry should also talk into industry, because some of these technologies like carbon capture utilization is so big that not one single company can perfect the technology. So we have to work together, maybe even with the government in terms of this commercialization of technology. But it is so obvious that industry alone cannot achieve the reduction goal. I'll give you an example. Without getting full access to renewable energy infrastructure and the policies in place to be able to directly purchase the renewable energy power from the source, it will be difficult to achieve RE100 goal as an industry. This is where public sector and its policy come into play. As far as carbon reduction from manufacturing processes, we are still relying on some major technical breakthrough that has yet to happen. Has to do with the processing technology, such as how to capture carbon and utilize it, what's the energy equation to make it happen, and catalyst technology and all that. The magnitude of this type of technical challenge is so big that no one company can perfect this technology alone. Hence the need for essential industry partnership and collaboration. In terms of technology, it is my view that we need to unleash full muscles of innovation and modern technologies to tackle this issue. For example, we need full deployment of data science and AI technology to optimize energy consumption in all of our operation. So technology and innovation have a huge role to play here.
Absolutely.
You asked about the leadership aspect of this, how to transform the organization. Among many other things, I guess I will narrow it down to eventually CEO's personal conviction and passion around climate change. I think their passion and conviction become contagious in the organization, and we all know that once we get our people's hearts and minds, then they'll be able to move the mountains and frankly, nothing less than moving the mountains is the type of monumental task ahead of us.
Contagious has been a word we're all very sensitive about over the year 2020. However, contagious in this sense is absolutely encouraged. Absolutely. Thank you so much. We heard the Asian voices. Let's go back to the European voices. Deputy Prime Minister, would you help us to understand how your country, Spain, and together with your colleague within the European Union, preparing for COP26 in Glasgow later in November? How do you think governments now could really get their policies concrete and done? We are talking about actions.
I think we are inspired as we were the CEO of LG, so working on a commit, operationalize and engage. Commit because I think that we have to be serious to fix the targets, to describe the strategy and the pathways. So to pay attention to anyone, but providing a good atmosphere and a good picture of things being achievable. This is very important. Otherwise, it looks impossible. Operationalize. I think this is also very important, and we've done a lot. And sometimes it's not easy. I think that fixing the framework in the legal context, but also being very serious in the policies is quite key. For instance, we are going through a huge industrial reconversion of the energy sector. That has allowed us to take some benefits. So the price of energy has been reduced almost 40% in less than 2 years, and we have closed 90% of the coal in less than 2 years, but stressing the solidarity policies and measures, so ensuring that no one feels left behind. This is also very important because it is quite an emotional shock. We need to raise public awareness and to go through this social territorial dimension with natural-based solutions and the restoration of ecosystems. And this is also to be very important in Glasgow, to make the right connections between the different elements, so to ensure that value, cost, finance get increasingly aligned. And finally, I think that engagement is very key. At the top, so the Prime Minister and the whole cabinet being engaged and going to see the reality and the policies and commitments through the glasses of climate action and the consistency with climate action and safety. And we have to be humble and listen to people, because I think that all these pathways need some flexibility. Nobody knows how to achieve the whole success without combining, correcting, or improving what we are doing. And I think that these are things that will be reflected in Glasgow. We need to be bold in terms of commitments. What about fossil fuels? What about the do not harm principle? What about the type of pressure that Christian Mummerat was stressing, but also the benefits of doing things properly? Only that could allow us to go beyond what we've got today.
Mr. Momentelli from Swiss Re, tell me more. How do you think from the private sector really rally more into the efforts, particularly leading up to Glasgow COP26? And certainly we see other conferences, for example, global conferences on biodiversity and many others addressing similar issues on green development.
Yeah, no, I'm very inspired by Mr. Shin. So let me use this framework to say what concretely can be done by CEOs all across the world who hopefully listen to us. So I think the first thing is you need to commit to net zero 2050. And as everybody has stressed, this is uncomfortable because no CEO can today say exactly how they will get there. So you need the leap of faith. You need to know you have to do it. That's the first thing. Operationalize. I think every company can do an analysis of all the projects they could do internally to reduce CO2 and to sort them by return period, by costs and benefits. And I think every company who has done that, who I know, 20 to 40% can actually be done in a shareholder-friendly way. You don't need the help of anybody. These are things you invest and you have a payback time of 3-4 years. So the beginning of this path to 2050, I think, is relatively easy. Then you have a middle part, which is not economical today, which is much harder. And then you have a final part, which is near impossible to get rid of. And for these two parts, I would ask people to engage and engage in particular. I have a particular interest. We have the Alliance of CEO Climate Leaders here at the WEF. We have 80 CEOs who have all committed to 2050 and realize that for this second and third bucket, we will need to work together. So for example, the second bucket, which is difficult, there's a whole value chain problem today that many industries for whom it is extremely difficult to do it in a shareholder-friendly way actually deliver their product to some companies who create end-user products. And while it's very difficult for these companies to get to net zero, once you put these costs to the end product, it's actually not costing much more. So a pair of jeans would be $1 more if it was produced net zero. A car would be $500 more if it was produced net zero. So there's an opportunity for the companies who create products for the end consumer to work together with upstream, with all the deliverers, with all their suppliers, to get to a more net zero world. And finally, I think also Mr. Shin has said it, for the impossible part, we will need to develop technologies to extract CO2 from the atmosphere. It can be planting forests, of course, but it could also be technologies which are not here today and which will be necessary. There's no way to get to net zero without technologies to extract CO2 from the atmosphere, and people don't talk enough about it. Our estimation is this industry has to be as big as the oil and gas industry today. That's how enormous this has to become by 2050. And there's also something where CEOs can work together to develop this.
All right. I don't think our time is enough because everyone has a lot to share. That's a great thing. Before we go, let's have this, what they call the popcorn style. One word from everyone so that we know what we have in mind moving forward. Let's start with the Deputy Prime Minister. Madam Deputy Prime Minister, please. One word.
Action.
Wonderful. I love it. Let's go to Governor Koike, the two women leaders in the panel.
One word? Okay, then time to act.
Go back to the slogan. Mr. Shin from South Korea.
Right. I have 3 words: commit, operationalize, and engage.
Okay. Last but not least, Mr. Momentale.
Commit net zero 2050.
Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure talking to you, and certainly see that not only the determination, but real actions already taking place, not just in this panel, but also in real life. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search us World Insight. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.